In this lecture, we will run the gateway service along with the rest of the services. But first, I want to update the services bootstrap YAML files and discovery services application YAML file with the Heroku configuration to enable faster checking for the eviction of unreachable services, so that we can observe the circuit breaker behavior easily. Let's do these changes first, then please run maven install command. So we will define a server configuration variable under Heroku config in discovery service application YAML file, and then set enable self-preservation mode to false, which tells to Heroku that do not try to recover if doesn't get a heartbeat from a client. Because by default Heroku configured to wait for a configured time before evicting the client for higher resiliency, as temporary network outage can always happen. So by setting this self-preservation mode to false, we forced Heroku that not to try to recover but evict the instances if they are not reachable. We then set eviction interval to 2 seconds, which is the interval that eviction task scans for instances with expired leases. With these values, discovery service will check the service's reachability for every 2 seconds, and if it is not reachable, evict it immediately. For the services, we create instance configuration under Heroku config in bootstrap YAML file and set lease expiration duration to 5 seconds, which means in each 5 seconds, client will ask for a new lease from Heroku server. Then we set lease renewal interval to 2 seconds, which is the time interval to send heartbeat from client to Heroku server. We set this as small value here to test the eviction easily. Please leave this as the default one, which is 30 seconds for production environment. Please add this configuration to Elastic Query Service, Kafka Stream Service, Analytics Service, and Web Client 1 and 2. Let's now run the maven install command to create the Docker images with the new config changes. We can then add Redis cluster compose file as it is needed by rate limiter. As you see, we have a cluster YAML file with master and slave, and we use the 6379 as the port. We use 6.05 version for the Redis image, and also add this file to the environment so that we can run this file with the single docker compose up command. Let's now add gateway service to the services YAML file. It will use 1990S port. We use the config server check file again for the entry point. And also here we updated the config server and Redis URL values to refer to hostnames inside Docker. For Redis, we need to set the hostname as Redis and use links in gateway compose definition for redis-master:redis. Because we have the hostname defined as Redis in the Redis cluster compose file, and we have the service name as defined redis-master there. Then we need to set the connection URL of query service to gateway in the web client, because now we want to use gateway as router in the communication. Also, we will change the query service config and use gateway service again for the analytics and Kafka Streams URL values. Finally, I will remove the context path values from query service, analytics service, and Kafka Streams service and use a single slash for context path, because now I want to redirect to these services by using the URI that comes after the name of the service. So here the wildcard after Elastic Query Service will be used as the URI for query service. And we can remove the context path as we want to use it directly to call the services. Instead, we will call gateway service, and we can keep the URL simple by removing the context path in that case. Great, let's now run the docker compose up command and follow the query service and gateway logs using docker logs command. Then we can log into web client and query to see if everything still works. Great, now let's copy one of the Elastic Query Services container ID. Remember that we have 2 instances of query service. And stop that container using docker stop command. Then we can check the discovery service logs. You'll see that it will be evicted quickly as we configured the Heroku server to do that. Then log in again to the web client and query. It will still work because we still have 1 instance, and gateway automatically started to use the only working instance instead of sending the request to the stopped one, because gateway is in communication with discovery service. Now if we stop the second query service, then go and query again, we'll see that gateway returns the fallback result because query service is not reachable now. And after configured window size and failure threshold values met, gateway opens the circuit and starts to use fallback controller that we defined. Let's also check if rate limiter works. We will use Postman to send a bunch of requests to gateway to be able to test rate limiter. Remember that we set the rate limiter configuration to allow 5 requests per second, with a temporary burst as 10. I will first call the gateway endpoint using port 1990, which is defined in our compose file, services YAML. To test this endpoint, we need to get a token from Keycloak, and we will use client credentials flow for that and send a curly request to Keycloak to obtain a token. Then we can use the token in the authorization header. As you can see, we can see the response from query service as our request is forwarded from gateway to query service. Now I will save these requests to a collection named rate limiter, and then open runner view of Postman by clicking the runner button. Then we choose the rate limiter collection we just created, and then send a single request first to test it. As you see, we get 200 response from gateway. Now I will send 200 requests at the same time to the gateway by changing the request count in runner, and then run it again. This time we will see that some requests are dropped at gateway level and returns 429 too many request response as rate limiter is applied and doesn't allow more than 5 requests per second. We can also check the gateway logs and observe 429 responses returned from gateway to client. Alright, we are also done with the gateway service. Congratulations! We will now continue by adding some metrics to our services. I will see you in the next section.